So we are on the draw here with all mountains and red spells, but this is a hand we can keep. This deck does play more mountains than islands because it is definitely more important to have a mountain than an island. Or I should say a red source of mana as compared to a blue source. But you do definitely want one of each source. So we'll see what our opponent's up to. We are definitely hoping that this Thermo Alchemist sticks in play and we can get going with that. Looks like our opponent could be on black-green Delirium, but we'll see if that's actually the case here. We would like to have something like a Fevered Visions to really put the pressure on early. So here's a grapple, and it looks like our opponent has some choices in terms of what they potentially will be returning from the graveyard. There's an Evolving Wilds, a Tracker, and a Grimflare. The Liliana can't return, but we see how quickly this deck is going to hit Delirium, so it had the option of returning something else instead of the Evolving Wilds, but essentially just one grapple and the black-green deck has already found Delirium, essentially, because with the Evolving Wilds in hand, that can get sacrificed and become the fourth card type in the graveyard. So we'll see if what our opponent has here. We definitely don't want a removal spell to get cast on this Thermo Alchemist because we don't have a ton else going on in terms of pressure. But there's the Grasp of Darkness, so not what we wanted. And we're in a difficult spot. We can play this Gaia Reach Sanitarium. And there's not too much we really want to do here. Yeah, just gonna pass the turn. We could fire off a Gaia Reach, our Collective Defiance, just to deal 3 to our opponent, but that seems extremely unexciting. So here's a Liliana, and expecting that to, well, our opponent's got a couple options of what they might want to do with that Lily. I could see arguments for both going up and going down, but it looks like our opponent is going to tick up here. So we could fire off this Fiery Temper. We could also just activate the Reach Sanitarium. I think we want to activate the Gaia Reach Sanitarium. We're really looking for some sort of pressure here. So I like the activation. We'll see exactly what our opponent wants to do. It looks like our opponent has discarded a Murder, which seems to indicate our opponent's got a pretty solid hand here. So we can discard a Lightning Axe. We don't really need 2 copies of Lightning Axe in our hand. And there's the Fevered Vision. So Fevered Vision's a pretty good draw. So we can just cast it here. So I think that is the play, to get the Fevered Visions onto the table. But we definitely don't want to see a card like Ishkana come down, because that's going to be pretty much a nightmare to deal with right now, because our opponent is still at 20. Picked up a Chandra. So our opponent can now isn't necessarily going to have 4 cards in hand, so this Fevered Visions, because we didn't play it on turn 3, is going to be a little bit less effective. And we've got a lot of removal, but not really a great way to use it. We didn't have a way to deal with the Liliana that there with only one turn. Collective Defiance only deals 3. We could redirect that to Lily, but Lily would still be on 4 loyalty. So we'll see what our opponent has. It looks like our opponent's thinking a little bit, so it's probably not land plus Ishkana, but it could be, there's the vessel that could get cracked. The Lily could go down looking for one of these creatures. So we'll see what our opponent elects to go with here. So our opponent is going with the option of ticking Lily down. And it looks like the choice is going to be either a Tireless Tracker or a Grimflayer in terms of which card our opponent is going to want to return here. I would suspect our opponent would be leaning towards the Tracker, but it depends if our opponent does have that 5th land already in hand. Otherwise, I could see the Grimflayer, and it looks like our opponent has gone with the Tracker. So we'll see the Tireless Tracker come down. We'll see if our opponent has a land to get a clue. It looks like instead of the land, it's going to be a Traverse the Ulvenwald, which makes sense. So the swamp is going to come into play. And there's a Sinister Concoction to follow up. So a pretty good turn there from our opponent. And all we have here is a Spire Bluff Canal. Huh. So we can use the Collective Defiance to get rid of the Tracker if we want to. We can also, I think we want to use the Defiance to get rid of the Tracker, and then the question becomes if we want to use the other mode on the Defiance. So it's pretty likely that our opponent has some gas in hand. So we could actually force our opponent to discard their hand and basically draw 3 new cards, which would be kind of nice because it's pretty likely our opponent has something like an Ishkana to play, but at the same time, I think we just have to play the Collective Defiance to get rid of the Tracker and the Liliana. So we're going to cast it with 2 modes. 4 damage to target creature, and then we're going to redirect the 3 damage to the Lily. And unfortunately, we're still not able to get a chance to attack our opponent's life total, which is a little bit unfortunate. And I'm expecting to see Ishkana come down this turn. It's pretty likely that that's going to happen. Not 100%. We could have also played Chandra that turn, but I think that we wanted to get the Lily off the board. We could have Galvanic Bombardmented the Tracker as well, but being able to use the Collective Defiance to get rid of 2 of our opponent's cards is pretty nice. So it looks like no Ishkana. That's good. Here's a Transgress the Mind. Interesting. So our opponent's going to see that we have a bunch of removal in hand. I would suspect the Collective Defiance or the Chandra will be the cards our opponent is going to want. One of those 2 cards would be the card our opponent's going to take here, but we'll see. So we have to be worried about Emrakul actually becoming a factor here. Here's an unsubstantiate. And we have a Thermo Alchemist. Interesting. Huh. Well, our opponent's got 6 card types in the yard. So the prospect of using this Collective Defiance and just making our opponent discard their hand it's definitely an option. We could also play the Alchemist, but I think I actually like this option. So let's go ahead and make our opponent discard their hand, and then we will also deal them 3 damage. And this way we're getting this Collective Defiance out of our hand. We'll see what we get. So, alright, we were able to get a Tracker and a Grasp. The Grasp would have been able to deal with our Thermo Alchemist, so not entirely unhappy about that exchange. We're able to get another Tracker out of our opponent's hand, but our opponent still has a reasonable amount of gas. We'll see. And so it looks like now our opponent was able to find Emrakul off of that vessel. So that's really unfortunate, because now this Emrakul is going to hit the battlefield. Our opponent has maybe missing 1 card type. Let's see. There's a tap land. So it looks like our opponent's got 6 card types and put down a Hissing Quagmire, so that Emrakul isn't going to be hitting play quite yet. So we've got 1 turn to see if we can somehow prepare for it in some way. I think we want to fire off this Galvanic Bombardment now to get rid of the Tracker. And what we really would have liked have been another Collective Defiance to be able to totally punish our opponent's play here. We did not, however, find what we were looking for here. So we've got an unsubstantiate, which we could use. We want to try to use all the cards we can this turn. So getting the Thermo Alchemist into play isn't really going to matter that much, but it's going to be hard for us to deal with the Emrakul once it does enter play. So we can Lightning Axe away the Grimflayer, and then Fiery Temper can go after our opponent. So unfortunately, we're kind of attacking our opponent's life total a bit too late in the game. And we can, yeah, we might as well just cast the Thermo Alchemist here. So our opponent is going to get a chance to resolve Emrakul. And once Emrakul actually does resolve, there's very little that we can do, unfortunately. So we've got no clean answer to it. We'll see what our opponent does with our turn. Fiery Temper was the draw step. But things are looking pretty grim, so if our opponent knows to use this Fiery Temper to target us, I think we're pretty much going to be dead at that point. We can't use the Unsubstantiate to bounce the Emrakul because of the protection from instants. Our opponent could activate the Reach Sanitarium. The Galvanic Bombardment, it can deal 3 to something at this point. So there's the Fiery Temper, as expected. That's gonna resolve. Yeah, I think we're done here. We're not gonna get past this Emrakul. So moving on to the sideboard. Unfortunately, had we gotten this Visions down on turn 3, that game would have been completely different. But it was not to be. So now we have to look at some of our bigger cards like Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. Summary Dismissal is an answer we can board in that actually answers Emrakul pretty well. So we can look at some of our spot removal, and I think that the Galvanic Bombardments are not really where we want to be for this matchup. So Bedlam Reveler, actually don't mind playing Bedlam Reveler here. So we could board in a couple Bedlam Revelers. Negate is kind of only okay. It doesn't counter the creatures, which are what we're the most worried about in this matchup. So I think we can actually just go with this configuration. Let's give it a go. Unsubstantiate. It's one of those cards where it may not seem great, but if we're able to use it to like hold off an Ishkanah for a turn, something like that, it could just be enough. And sometimes, you know, it's a versatile card. It's card disadvantage most of the time, but we're really looking to get that Fever Visions down on turn 3. If we had gotten that Thermo Alchemist down and our opponent hadn't used a removal spell, that also would have been great. So there were a number of things in that last game that just didn't go our way. And I think this matchup overall is actually fine for the blue-red side, but our opponent had things just lined up better for our opponent that last game. And here we've got an awkward draw where we have the Fevered Visions. We just don't have that blue source. And while it was fine the other game, this game it's a lot more worrisome to not have it. However, we do have the Reach Sanitarium, so I think I'm going to keep just because we have our best card in the matchup in Fevered Visions. And if we immediately draw the blue source, we're in great shape. If we don't, we can still try to loot and look for it. So I'm gonna gamble a little bit here. Hope for something like a Spirebluff Canal right off the top. If we don't get there, then we'll try to assemble Fevered Visions the hard way. Unfortunately, Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, pretty much the last card we wanted to draw. It's not only not the blue card, but it's a double blue card that we were pretty far away from casting here. So our opponent does have a Grimflayer. And we're kind of regretting this keep, but we've got to move forward with it. So rather than activate the Reach Sanitarium, we're just going to run out a Thermo Alchemist. it can block the Grimflayer, and we're still going to hope to draw out of the spot. So our opponent could have Liliana to get rid of our Thermo Alchemist, but I think we still have to block and hope that isn't the case, just because our hand is not where we want it to be at the moment. So it looks like our opponent's setting up a little bit here with Traverse the Ulvenwalds to find their land drop. So it's actually 4 copies of Traverse. Not something you normally see, but that means that our opponent didn't have that many lands to begin with. So I think we just take this opportunity to use the Reach Sanitarium, and unfortunately we did not find what we were looking for. So we can just pass the turn here. Our opponent discarded Emrakul. Interesting. So we might have to use this Collective Defiance to cycle our hand away. And our opponent's attacking here again. I think we're in the same spot where we block. We're not happy about it. Our opponent can go Swamp plus Liliana, but doesn't feel good, but that is what's going to happen here. And we can redirect this to the Lily, so I think we definitely want to do that. That's going to put Lily on 3. So we can potentially use this Collective Defiance to get rid of the Liliana and the Grimflayer. So let's go ahead and do that. And at least making this play, our opponent didn't have time to tick down Emrakul to get back that... Sorry, tick down Liliana to get back that Emrakul. But we've still kind of got a busted draw. Our opponent does only have 3 card types in the graveyard, although this grapple is going to make the 4th card type, so our opponent now has Delirium. And this picked the brain, so now our opponent is going to be able to get our Storm Chaser Mages or our Fever Visions. Either way, we're in a terrible spot now that this pick the brain is going to resolve here. So we'll see which of the 2 our opponent opts to go with. And it looks like the Fever Visions is going to be the choice, which makes sense. It's our most important card. If we had gotten it down on turn 3, I believe we would have won this game. And I believe that we had a reasonable chance of that happening. But I'm someone that likes to keep a lot of hands. And perhaps that was a mulligan. But hindsight's 20/20. We drew too many mountains, and here's Ishkana and a Hissing Quagmire. So Spiral Bluff Canal, it's a little bit late. We can go ahead and loot here. So our opponent has discarded an excess land. And we're going to be taking 5, it looks like, this turn. So we'll see. Here's another copy of Pick the Brain. So that Pick the Brain our opponent's going to get to choose. It looks like it's going to be the collective defiance that our opponent's taking away from us. And the transgress, that's going to be able to answer the Jace still in our hand. So we can go ahead and ping our opponent for 1 here. And I believe we can just play the Storm Chaser Mage. Let's go ahead and loot with the Gaia Reach Sanitarium first here. So might as well discard this Highland Lake. And we have a choice of whether or not to get in with the Storm Chaser Mage. Might as well. But this is one of those spots where Ishkana is pretty powerful. Now Liliana can tick down. We'll see what our opponent wants to get back, and it was the Emrakul that our opponent got back there. So this attack is going to be for 6. Interesting. So we can just block the spider here. And we can ping away the Liliana with our Thermo Alchemist. So if we draw a blue source, we have the dismissal for the Emrakul. Unfortunately, this Highland Lake comes into play tapped, and that's just going to do it. Our opponent's going to be able to cast Emrakul next turn. So that's going to do it for the match.